Welcome back to ISCON 3. Thank you for staying with us. We move on now to another interesting and multifaceted topic, that of disaster preparedness and prevention, still in the context of Asia-Europe digital connectivity cooperation. For this, I would like to invite Stefania Benalia, head of the Global Connectivity Program at CEPS, to moderate this conversation. Stefania, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Indeed, we now move on the last panel of this ISCON edition, which I believe is actually a good conclusion because it brings together elements from all the previous discussion, starting from the two pillars on which the initiative is centered this year, human-centric and resiliency, which really are the basis of disaster preparedness and prevention. We have heard many key words during these 2 days, but the one that we have repeatedly heard from are access and interoperability, which again are key for this panel discussion. So I would like to start by asking a kickoff question general to the panelists, which is how can access be ensured and guaranteed and facilitated in the context of disaster preparedness and prevention. And same goes, how can we actually ensure interoperability, which is another key aspect for ensuring success. Another point, another key word is the importance of standards. And we've heard from the very beginning, from the opening remarks of Helena Koenig, and that also stress the importance of standards. So let's start off with this. For this, I would like to invite Mr. Dinesh Sharma, Associate with European Standardization Project, CESEI, as the Director of Standards and Public Policy for the last 10 plus years. Dinesh is the focal point in India, representing the European standards organizations, ETSI, CEN, CENELEC, the European Commission, and the European Free Trade Association, the EFTA. Dinesh, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Stefania, for inviting me to be a part of this important conference, which is the third edition of Asia-Europe Sustainable Connectivity Scientific Conference. And the most important topic which we're talking about here is disaster preparedness and prevention. And my role in few minutes as allocated to me, I will be more talking about the standards which has been talked about since beginning. To begin with my presentation, and of course, I need to touch upon all these type of disasters. I mean, I think we did talk about since yesterday about it, but we know that there are natural disasters, there are man-made disasters, and there are hybrid mix of both man and natural disasters. I mean, you talk about cyclone, you talk about drought, flood on one side from a natural disasters point of view, but then there are man-made disasters like train, aviation. I mean, of course, when I see preparedness and preventions, I do see a role of the green transition as well, because at the end of it, you have to take care of the climate so that you could reduce the possibility of these disasters. But due to paucity of time, I'm not covering the green side of it, but more I'm covering and talking about in the next few slides, the preparedness more from a digital connectivity point of view. I mean, you talked about it, the access and the interoperability. And that is where I will be sharing in my few slides what we have done in Europe. But before I talk about these standards and what has been done in Europe, let's make a note of it that when we talk about digital connectivity, which is based on mostly about information communication technologies, you cannot have a technology which is not interoperable. You cannot have a technology which is regional or local, because interoperability cannot be achieved if it is local and regional, which means it has to be global. Even if the work is carried out in Europe, whatever work has been done until now, it's based on the ICT, which means it is completely interoperable. Even if they are called as European standards or technologies, they are globally applicable. So with that, a couple of reasons why, what role does the digital technologies and standards play when we talk about disaster preparedness and prevention. I mean, they play a valuable role, not only preventing but even preparing themselves for delivering effective and timely humanitarian aids. And similarly, these are very important tools because again, you said access. Access means communications, which means you have to have a system where you can inform the public well in advance, because if you are aware of it, and even post the disaster, which means not only the public, but the authorities to authorities, or public to authorities, all these communications has to be put in place, which means you should need to have a resilience as well. When you roll out these technologies, you should have a resilience in a way as well. And then lastly, interoperable means, as I said, the standard has to be interoperable, because sometimes a situation arises that while it is a disaster, say in India, but then it's so big that you need help from other countries or the neighboring organizations or the partners. When they come for the aid, they bring the equipment which is completely interoperable on the existing infrastructure. So that's why we need all those interoperable. These are two slides I will be talking about Europe, what Europe has done it. So begin with, Europe has a directive 2018, which was upgraded in 2018, started in 1972. So Europe has a public warning system, which uses a cell broadcast service to alert the public. It could be pre, it could be post, but let the public aware of it. So this is mandatory to be implemented. And then when you have a standard or when you have a technology rolled out, it needs to be reviewed to make sure it is latest and greatest of the art. That's why this overview of emergency communication network resilience and preparedness topic, to maximize the level of preparedness and resilience, this particular technical report was published by ITSI 102445. This presentation will be shared, and these are all hyperlinked if somebody needs more information around it. This is the latest publication in 2023, which means it talks about where we stand, what more we should do when we roll out these technologies. Even if these solutions have been rolled out, we need to be upgraded and updated as the technology progresses. Then there is a third generation partnership project. It's a partnership project where standards organizations from around the world come together, including academia, including OEMs. They all work together to develop these specifications. This is a global standard. So when these specifications comes out, these are applied by the entire world. I mean, even ITU endorsed these specifications. I'm bringing up one particular working group which is dedicated for this critical communication. And when you talk about critical communications, there could be mission critical push to talk, which is a voice communications. There could be mission critical video exchange. And then there is a solution called public protection and disaster relief, popularly known as PPDR. I mean, this particular working group has also produced emergency calls, e-call standards, which means this could be used by the public or it could be also used in vehicle emergency situations, which means 112. Then there are specifications which are again developed to take care of the EU alert system. And then there is one technical specifications I've highlighted in this presentation, which specifically talks about European public warning system using the cell broadcast service. Making note of it, I have said BB, which means broadband. This is a technology which is a broadband based technology, which means it supports all the various use cases. You can transfer the videos, you can have the push to talk situations, you can have voice, you can send SMS. Every type of communication possible is supported by these specifications. So this is a very, very important solutions when you should put it in place in case of emergency situations before the emergency situations kicks off. Then there is another situation, another technical committee, which is TETRA. And TETRA is a terrestrial trunk radio. It's a narrowband technology. It started well before 3GPP, and this was also rolled out globally by the world. And it does take care of various situations, various organizations like public safety, transportation, utilities, government, military, commercial, industrial, and oil and gases. But this is a communications. It has some limitations in terms of the data speeds. That's why it is called narrowband. But it also has an importance because we need different systems. One system could fail, but then you should have a backup system. So this is also an important one. Then you have a third one, which is dedicatedly working technical committee at ITSI on emergency communications. We call it MTEL. And I've given some more information around it. Again, this particular technology is based on IP. So this is not on cellular. 3GPP was on cellular. TETRA was limited from a narrowband point of view. again, radio technologies, but this is purely based on IP. This is also very important. And then it takes care of the four scenarios, whether it is a communication of citizens to authorities or from authorities to citizens or from between the authorities. So it takes care of entire scenarios. It also deals with others like next generation's 112. When 112 is started, you press a button and then you can only talk. But then you need to support the SMS, videos, and other scenarios as well. Some specifications I have mentioned. For example, there is a core element which should be independent of the commercial network in case of emergency services. So there is a technical specification. Similarly, there is a transporting handset location. Location plays a very important role in case of disaster because authorities should know from where the call has been originated. So there is a directive, there is a regulation which says mandatory that must ensure that the caller location is communicated from the mobile devices to the authorities so that they know the location of the person in case it needs to be picked up. And then you have another system which is under development because what happens when you call 112, it should go to the nearest possible public safety answering point so that the authorities can reach faster. And this server will take care of that. The specification exists, but it will be updated very soon in December 2023. And then various scenarios of emergency situation, interoperability testing. Also, there is a specification to ensure that the system which has been developed is interoperable. And just a link where it will be stored. So this is briefly in Europe, but again, it's a global standard implemented worldwide. In next two slides, I'll show you what India has done until now. When you talk about in India, there is a telecom regulator. Way back in 2018, it's a recommendations that the India should roll out a national broadband PPDR network, which means based on the 3GPP global standard, utilizing a packet services LTE technology to handle the communications at all time of natural disaster. After that, the Telecommunication Engineering Center, which is a department of telecom under Ministry of Communications, they also prepared a study report analyzing this communication technology for disaster. And then this paper gives entire requirements, how it should be rolled out, what all should be covered. The latest and greatest right now is the Government of India under Department of Telecom with Ministry of Home Affairs is working on allocating a dedicated spectrum for these emergency services rollout for mission critical applications, which is PPDR, and they're talking about the band 5, which is 850 megahertz. This particular band is currently occupied by the Tetra communication, which I showed in my earlier slide. So the Tetra communication will move to another band because it's a narrow band technology. By utilizing the capability of this 850 megahertz, this PPDR will be rolled out. So we are hopeful that while the existing solutions, like for example, in February 2019, India launched a pan-India service of single emergency number. Before that, we had a different number for different services. Like police, we had a 100 number, fire emergency, we had a 100 number. So different numbers were existing. They consolidated that and said, let's have a single emergency number. So they rolled out that, and it is launched under the Emergency Response Support System, and it has been designed by the Indian Research Organization, which is Center for Development of Advanced Computing, CDAC. And this ERSS, as of now, does not support emergency call related to disaster. However, the National Disaster Management Authorities of India is working to roll out this emergency number during it. So they're in the process of implementing it. They're also working on rollout common alert protocol, like EU alert. They're also working on it so that it could be communicated, whatever kind of communication is there, to send out early warning messages to people in danger zone. Continue, again, the same organization, research organization, CDAC, they have also developed long back Tetra, again, based on this European standard, global standard. And again, while it was limited for a narrow band, but they developed this solution in India and they rolled it out for the entire portfolio of it. That is currently in existence. And of course, last but not the least, India is a member of Coalition of Disaster CDRI, which is the best thing because you have to work together to ensure that the digital infrastructure is rolled out, which is accessible and which is interoperable. With that, if I could conclude my presentation to raise the level of preparedness for possible future disaster, it is very necessary to have a common approach, which means common standard to use of the digital technologies and standard. By leveraging technologies, data exchange and collaborative efforts, both regions can improve their ability to anticipate response disasters. So they need to work together. And EU-Asia digital and data connectivity cooperation does have a huge potential to significantly enhance disaster preparedness and resilience. With that, thank you very much for my interventions. I look forward for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting peek in what actually means working it in practical terms with the standards. I would now like to move to Irina Raftana, a PhD researcher at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS, at the University of Bonn. Her research focuses on the social constructions and political cultural dimensions of technology in the making of Indonesia's tsunami early warning system. Irina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania, and also Sebs, for the honor to share thoughts and instigate ideas for our conversation today in this Asia-Europe Sustainable Connectivity Scientific Conference. In my 7 minutes talk, I would like to convey 2 key points. First, lessons from a real event in Indonesia, the Sunda Strait in 2018, known as an atypical source. Second would be a question, rather, on how we rethink resilience and preparedness in regards with the role of technologies and digitalization while considering the manifolds of social dimensions of risk, including risk perception. So that would be my proposal. Like many other countries lying in the so-called Ring of Fire, Indonesia is historically built and shaped by earthquakes, volcanoes, and tsunamis. Knowledge around living with earthquakes circulating locally with different meanings and responses, but also often interpreted quite differently as how modern science would define these natural processes. However, warning system technologies emerged and introduced largely only after the Indian Ocean 2004. And this entails with a need to encourage more digital literate society, a new way of understanding risk, and not only in dealing with the natural hazards, but also with the technology advancements, attempting to mitigate the disasters. And these are the entanglements of the emerging notions of risk, including the idea of accepting risk, calculations, and investments for the probabilities that could happen in the future. These entanglements include sense of discomfort, dismay, and doubts, coupled with tensions, transcendental beliefs, and local values, but also layered by advancements of connectivity through digitalization, particularly through the role of social media. We now step into the Indonesian case of volcano-induced tsunamis that occurred and exposed coast along the Sunda Strait, and compromising 500,000 of coastal populations and tourists. The touristically famous Gunung Anak Krakatau volcano was detected active actually 6 months prior the disaster, and at this point of time, information are much more accessible through social media and handheld gadgets. That is, on one hand, useful in disseminating warning and initiate evacuation. The tsunami warning system, however, is designed to respond to earthquake-induced tsunami threats. So the crawling hazard months prior to the tsunami was out of the radar, at least within the general public. This compartmentalization of understanding hazard between natural hazards such as earthquakes and volcanoes, and also atmospheric hazards such as storm surges, coupled with industrial hazard and also critical infrastructures are manifested in the failure of tsunami warning system to perform and save lives. The event occurred around 9 p.m. in the evening. The electricity was cut out even 1 hour before for another different reason. And during the time, high tides occurred and also were announced to the public. The offshore volcano reached a stage where then the body of the volcano collapsed and then generated tsunamis within minutes. Since the tsunami warning system in Indonesia was not designed to respond to volcanic events that trigger tsunamis, no warning was issued. On the other hand, the information about high tides and potential storm surges was disseminated and created massive confusions. Most of the coastal population are exposed to preparedness, actually, to tsunami drills, but not with such complex and cascading scenarios. Many lives were compromised where it was actually possible to save lives should we have better knowledge, better technology infrastructures, and also response system. So from this point, I would argue that the battlefield of all disaster risk reduction actors and scientists, civil societies, and government is to accept that we are expected to consistently build capacities to understand and reflect such complex and cascading risks with a different look on how technologies could play a much better role. And that is span not only about saving lives when a disaster happened, but about the striving of weeks, months, and years afterwards when life are never the same anymore, in the resettlements, for example, and with a lack of infrastructure, capabilities to build dialogue in an eye-level communities at risk, often during the post-disaster situation, actually get worse and far from the idea of building back livelihood better. Now I come to my last point. I hope I can click this. I would argue that the notion of risks and the meaning making around it with the notions of technology and mobility might not differ that much between the North and the South. And Indonesia and Germany provide fruitful example. We need to look again whether ideas about risk reduction technologies, preparedness, and resilience have successfully traveled to other places, such as how warning systems and flood hazards are experienced in the Ahr Valley floods in 2021 Germany. In the sense triggered by the notion of interoperability, as mentioned by Dinesh in the previous talk, I would add the importance of rethinking trans-regional interoperability, where human and technology mobility are significantly increasing. Technologies, as we now understand, brings its potentials to save lives, of course, but on the other hand, induce new vulnerabilities. And with this, I would invite further discussion to rethink on what we mean by preparedness and resilience. I'm happy to share that we are continuously learning from the above points, for example, through the joint Indonesia-German Tsunami Risk Project, of which places the social dimensions, including the notions of risk culture, in the heart of this effort. What is currently missing is the engagement of social science to critically reflect on how resilience and preparedness is defined in the context of such complex risks. That goes as well with warning system technologies. And these components of risk management tend to be seen as completed and done, and it is left to the communities or the so-called last mile to adjust and prepare themselves based on the given risk information and the established warning system. I came into conclusion that such argument is false and misleading. Our knowledge about hazards and our capability in applying technologies are never linear, continuously growing like living creatures, and often incompatible with highly dynamic and our geological as well as social fabric. Lastly, as a STS scholar, science, technology, and society scholar, I observe even further beyond the human-centric entanglement, human, non-human, and beyond human entanglement, and move away from the notion of human-centric perspective. So I see this as an exciting and interesting kind of pitch to the discussion, and happy to share more during the discussion. So thank you very much, and now over to you, Stefania.
Thank you very much indeed. Looking forward to great discussion also based on your inputs. I would now like to move on to the third speaker, Mr. Mohammed Habib, researcher at the Department of International Relations at CSIS Indonesia, who has extensive work in disaster, health, and climate-related issues. Please, a quick note to the audience that in general terms, please have your questions coming through the chat function already, and in particular for Mohammed, that it will leave right after this conversation. So please pass them along already. And I would also like, as it is going to be, and we're conscious of time, I would like also to invite Mohammed to already share your presentation, the reaction to the presentation from Irina and Dinesh already at the end of your presentation, if you feel so. So that, Mohammed, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I hope my voice, you can hear my voice clearly. So today I'm going to share, anyway, thank you so much for the ISCON committee, for the invitation. We'll be very happy to talk about submarine cables in ASEAN. After hearing what Danesh presented before, concentrating on standards, and also Irina mentioned about the human. Now, I think I would like to focus my presentation into the infrastructure element of our topic today. So let me just go straight to my point. So thanks to submarine cables, as we know, the world is more connected than ever before. And probably you can see from your monitor right now how massive and how how immense like the world is connected because of these submarine cables. Intercontinental cables like from North America to Europe to Asia and so on and so forth. But I also want to emphasize why like submarine cables are so important. There are three functions like of submarine cables basically. The first one is for our connectivity. 95% of intercontinental communication and internet traffic actually are channeled through submarine cables. This is very, I think there is a prevailing myth in the international community that our internet traffic is channeled through like satellites. I think that is not happening. Like what we have, and the reality is like 95% is channeled through like submarine cables. The second function is for energy transmission. Basically, like submarine cables are useful for energy transmission in the archipelagic context, especially between islands to islands, and also like offshore energy extraction too. And the third function is for scientific research. When you mentioned, I mean, like Irina mentioned a lot about earthquake and tsunami early warning system, and definitely one of the medias, one of the media we use is actually like submarine cables. So by having like extensive submarine cables, we can provide more and also rapid early warning system for earthquakes and tsunami risk. And because they are so important and also like so indispensable, we cannot afford any damage to them, and we need to handle submarine cables with care. And I think, as I mentioned earlier in my title, I would like to focus on the Southeast Asia or ASEAN region, and there are three reasons why submarine cables in Southeast Asia are getting more important, or more strategic. The first one is because the growth of its digital economy. As you can see, like from your monitor, basically like the Southeast Asia digital economy is projected, to grow like 20% year on year, like since I think like over the past couple of years. And also like it almost reaches like $200 billion. And I think like that's a huge number somehow, and it keeps growing as the internet penetration in our society grows. And the second reason is also because the worrying geopolitical competition in Southeast Asia, whether it's in the South China Sea, whether it's in near Taiwan Strait or Luzon Strait, between the Philippines and also Taiwan, and also like the Straits of Malacca. Like Singapore is the hub in the region. Like it connects like 26 submarine cables. I think like almost the highest, I think like among the highest numbers in the world. So I think like the geopolitical competition in the region also makes submarine cables probably like a thing to concern on. And then the third one is because like there is a push for energy transition. And I think like, a lot of ASEAN countries have explored so many options to enhance their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think like Singapore and Vietnam, as we can trace, like over the past few years, have been discovering offshore solar system and also wind farm. And they definitely use like submarine cables to transmit them like from the offshore facility, therefore offshore facilities to the shore of Singapore and also like Vietnam. So these are the reasons why the submarine cables in Southeast Asia are getting more strategic than ever before. And now I think like I would like to come into like the core of my presentation. What are the problems in ASEAN basically when it comes to submarine cables? Basically, Southeast Asia is one of the the most prone regions to disasters, multiple disasters, from earthquakes, tsunami, climate change related disasters like cyclones and so on and so forth. But the thing is, despite this sense of urgency or this immediate pressure and also this immediate threat, we haven't really considered, a strategic plan to enhance resilience in our submarine cables. so many declarations and roadmaps basically that ASEAN has produced, but little in concerted practical action somehow. And you can read, I don't know, I mean, like you can read all documents, but for example, if you read like the ASEAN Digital Master Plan 2025, there's so little discussion about like how to prevent like digital infrastructure from like any kind of disaster basically. But when it comes to like you read the disaster related documents in ASEAN, like ICT roadmap on disaster management, the perspective they use, they only see like ICT infrastructure, you know, for communication and technology somehow, to enhance their work, to enhance, I don't know, like disaster prevention, disaster monitoring, and so on and so forth. But I don't think like they are aware about disaster risk that probably like can cause damage to like the ICT and also like submarine cables, which are also important for the you know, our early warning system. And the other one is about limited interagency coordination. Yes, like disaster management stakeholders in the region, we already have our own treaty, we already have our own mechanism, but the thing is they do not really communicate with those agencies, those mechanisms that are working in submarine cables, that are working in like digital technologies and so on and so forth. So and definitely when it comes to public-private sectors, somehow like submarine cables you know, submarine cables are only a concern for private tech sector rather than like for the government, despite the fact that, you know, I think most of ASEAN governments now are digitalizing their system, they're digitalizing their services, but I think like it hasn't been there. I mean, like in terms of awareness about like submarine cables, and also like the reality that their submarine cables are prone to disasters. And this situation somehow leads to the lack of proper public investment and also relevant research budget. And I just want to show you this statistic between like ASEAN and also like Europe in terms of membership in the International Cable Protection Committee. I think like this also shows like how much awareness, I mean, like the region has, countries in the respective region have when it comes to submarine cables protection. Like in ASEAN, only Singapore, like, you know, leads the rank somehow. Like they are very aware because they are the hub in the region. But, you know, in Indonesia, we are not really aware about the situation despite, you know, our geographical feature as an archipelagic island. We do not really consider, we do not really invest in protecting our submarine cables, despite the fact that, you know, Indonesia probably is the, you know, the most prone country in the in Southeast Asia. And you know, when it compares to like Europe, like our awareness somehow is just lags behind. So with that being said, I think, oh sorry, this case I think is also important to mention. Tonga, there was an undersea like volcanic eruption in early 2020, because Tonga only had one submarine cable that connects them with the international community, with international communication. And that submarine cable somehow was cut off because of the volcanic eruption. And somehow, yeah, they cannot really communicate during those period. And I think that, you know, you mentioned about the resilience, and, you know, by having only one submarine cable in disaster-prone region will not help us to achieve resilience. And that's why not only we need to diversify, and also we need to build like probably redundant submarine cables in certain areas prone to disaster. We also need like to invest more in research and also identifying like disaster risk you know, location, especially near the submarine cable sites. So with that being said, again, I would like to further push for more. I think I would like to encourage more cooperation between ASEAN and also European Union when it comes to submarine cable protection. I think this is very important, and build, dialogue, bring dialogues, bring stakeholders into one single page, one common page about the importance of submarine cables for either connectivity, for energy transmission, and also like for the for disaster preparedness, for scientific research. So I think the European Union has issued like the global gateway blueprint. But somehow I think in terms of submarine cables haven't been really discovered in Southeast Asia. So I think that could be one area of cooperation in the future. And let me just conclude my presentation. While Southeast Asia must continuously improve its connectivity using submarine cables, the region also needs to raise its safeguards for undersea cables against any catastrophe. That being said, I'll give it back to you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also very interesting to have a peek on what is the reality of submarine cables. Now, I know that you are meant to leave in 4 minutes, but I have a very quick question to follow up with you. You mentioned indeed the ASEAN Master Plan, Connectivity Master Plan with the digital, and you mentioned a certain reading of it. Now, my question for you is, of course, it's called 2025, so it will soon have to be revised. If you were to have a pen holder, what would be your one recommendation to include in the new digital master plan?
Right. I think like this is, like what I just presented is very critical for them, like for ASEAN countries, given its, the sheer size of its digital economy, as I mentioned earlier, and also like the fact, the strategic location that ASEAN has. And that's why I think like submarine cables, like other, like probably satellites, for like disaster prevention and also like disaster monitoring and disaster recovery are also I think like immediately needed to be included in the next digital master plan somehow, because climate change is the current threat we have right now, and climate change worsens basically disaster risk. And we don't know, like what will be the consequences in the future if we do not, pay attention to our submarine cables. So yeah, I think like that's it, Stephanie. I hope it answers your question, and apologize for rushing everything.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. I would now again repeat the call to the audience to submit questions, which at this point will be discussed with the other two speakers. So now I would actually like to revert in revert order, actually, follow up with Irina. Irina, at the end of your presentation, you indeed mentioned the human-centric approach, and I understand that perhaps you had something that you would like to share on that regard. Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Stefania. I think the way we see the social reality using human-centric approach, and mainly for my background, which is sociology and sociology of knowledge, sometimes there are tension and also problems defining the social world using the social lenses, because this narrative comes with different power relations, and often these powers are asymmetric between scientists, for example, the government, and lay people. On the other hand, we also see the other agency, so to speak, or affordedness of the non-human dimension, the tsunami itself, regulate the way population or the society are performing their daily activities. They are pushed away once a tsunami event occurred. They are forgiven and forgotten. And I think digital intervention also plays a role in this. And in this sense, we tend to forget that there are other power that are overlooked, which is beyond the human. And by incorporating this, understanding this, I think it's more humbling and more I think more comprehensive to understand the social world problem. It's a little bit, how do you call it, meta in the explanation, not really concrete. But I guess incorporating the non-human dimension in our discussion really finds its importance.
Thank you very much. We now have about 20 minutes for a Q&A. I first perhaps revert also to Dinesh, and again, call for the audience to engage with our speakers. Dinesh, would you mind to tell me how can the EU and Asia Digital and Data Connectivity Cooperation can play a role in strengthening the disaster preparedness and resilience? Dinesh, I'm afraid you are on mute.
Got it.
Now you.
Yes. No, when we talk about digital connectivity, before I say something around it, I go back to the presentation which Mohammed made it. A very, very critical component of it. I mean, which is missed out somehow, in different connectivity partnership. The submarine cable, which is the backbone of entire communications, connecting the region, connecting the world. We must protect it. That is one point. The second side of it, we have to have the satellite. I mean, of course, a lot of work is happening from standards point of view. We must integrate in our communications more and more through satellite as well. So if like building up the resilience, when one fails, the second backup is ready, which means satellite. And I can tell you from a standards point of view with 3GPP, the broadband connectivity through satellite is picking up a pace. And globally, even in India, they are rolling out a policy to encourage. It's a bit expensive, and they are trying to put models into it by which they can make it affordable. And using the existing infrastructure, whether it is based on cellular, whether it is based on IP, whether it is based on wireline, we must have the resilience in these connectivity. That is from a country-wide perspective as well as from a digital connectivity point of view. So effectively, what I'm saying is digital connectivity need to be strengthened more through partnership in view of the digital trade, in view of the disaster. Hence, we must include satellite as well as the submarine cable also as part of it, while making sure that the whatever solutions you have rolled out, different countries, different regions, different around the world, we must make sure that it is interoperable. So I think there is a lot of opportunity by which we can strengthen this connectivity considering the new geopolitical situation while protecting the existing infrastructure in a resilience, which means create a redundancy in terms of those connectivity solutions which are based on global standard, take care of the interoperability. I hope it answers your question, Stephanie.
Thank you. Do you want to also go on the specificities of EU Asia? And perhaps actually I may bounce this question to you as well, talking about the 2025 ASEAN Master Plan. If you would be given the possibility to have a recommendation included, and then I will actually ask Irene as well the same question, what would be your one recommendation in view of what we've been discussing in the last 2 days? What you would include in the upcoming digital master plan? And perhaps, bouncing the question back, how would you suggest the global gateway to approach the connectivity with ASEAN? So, in terms of political recommendations.
So my suggestion would be, I see that, while different partnership instruments exist, but when you talk about situation like disaster preparedness and prevention, as well as connectivity, public authorities has to come forward, put funding and money. They need to come. Private agencies does it, but when private agencies does it, they see it from a commercial angle of it. This is not something commercial. I would pen down that government need to allocate fund not only within their regions, but also make sure the partners, the neighboring countries, and in ASEAN, with the help of other partners like Europe, must come forward and dedicate fund, and focus on ensuring that the projects, the solutions, the technologies are implemented in a holistic manner by by strengthening each other's cooperation. That is what I will pen down as part of the next master plan.
Thank you. Irina, would you like to provide your policy recommendations?
Yes, thank you. I think the submarine cables to detect tsunamis has been discussed for quite a while as an alternative of the real-time sea observation provided by tsunami buoys, for example, or tide gauges. With the fact that these instrumentations are highly expensive, difficult to maintain, while submarine cables are already an existing infrastructure that can be, double used as also part of the disaster risk reduction technologies, and of course complemented by the satellite to really provide a real event predictions or forecasts. So, for example, for the Krakatau event, if we have this kind of data far before, we could have saved more lives, and that's really clear. But the thing is, we do understand the political economy tensions between different entities in regards with the use of such infrastructure that did not materialize, and this is still a huge problem. So I think overcoming these tensions for the purpose of improving, or for the purpose of accessing a more economically, it's not very cheap, I understand, but it's more economical to use existing infrastructure for this forecasting is indeed important. On the other hand, it is also important to underline that these kind of alternatives need to also alleviate the power asymmetries between different countries. At the first hand, maybe several countries cannot afford to buy their tsunami buoys and tide gauges and really rely on other countries, and thus created different political asymmetries and also tensions. So these kind of alternative and reusing of existing advancements of technology should be able to overcome these asymmetries in the near future. And I would be looking forward to such refurbishments in the next master plan.
Thank you. Excellent. I would now like to throw another question, a little bit more, we have heard a lot about the importance of coordination. How would you actually go along and make sure that the different connectivity projects actually are coordinated in a way that we facilitate the interoperability, and we also facilitate a healthy competition amongst the connectivity initiatives? Because de facto we are seeing a degree of proliferation of connectivity initiatives throughout the world, and in particular in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, there is always the danger of unhealthy competition. So how would you make sure that we put in place a virtual dynamic whereby different connectivity initiatives are interoperable and complementary and coordinating amongst each other, versus the opposite scenario, which is certainly something that should be avoided? I think, Irina, I don't know if you want to go first with this one, and then Dinesh?
Yes, I can go first with that. I think we have several lines of options. We already have formal structure, for example, performed by the IOC UNESCO. That's just one example how intergovernmental coordinating group plays the role in this kind of exchanges and coordinate these transboundary connectivity, but through a rather formal governance mechanism and approaches. While on the other hand, there are actually growing connectivities among, for example, youth and young professional groups. And an example would be U-Inspire Alliance that connects, I think now it's more than 16 countries throughout the world. It's a rather social movement, but also offering examples and also experimental work in how do you call it, public science, or science by the society rather. It's an alternative approach, very fluid, and I think it really relate and respond to the current advancements of technology and how youth and young professionals and young scientists can play a role using these kind of platforms and connectivities. They are definitely connected to the UN body and governance. And I think it is timely to strengthen these types of connections politically.
Thank you. Dinesh, do you want to share your perspective?
Yeah, I think I concur with Irina. A platform like CDRI, it's a good platform where we have membership from different part of the world. If they are members of it, probably we need to have a more governance structure, more organized way, more participation, so that whatever efforts one country is doing, it could exchange with other members. So we should have a roadmap like the master plan. Once it is in place, we could utilize a platform like CDRI to have a more active participation. Even if there is a connectivity project happening, but when we talk about the disaster situations, a more coordination and exchange of data is needed. No, there could be a case study, there could be a scenario which happened in another part of the world, but then using the CDRI, probably we could learn from that and we could avoid it and prepare better. As I said, we do have instruments available, but they do not see the real outcome of it. When you're building an infrastructure, even the research and innovation together, the joint project, the data exchange, and strengthening this, what we are doing it, because the NDRF team of one side would be called tomorrow by the neighboring country, but then they don't know which system they're using. So it's more exchange and more dialogue by utilizing the platform like CDRI would be a right way to have some kind of linkages when we move forward and strengthen these digital infrastructure. This is what I could say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're slowly but truly moving towards the end of this session. So before closing up, I would actually like to ask to both of you if you can share your one takeaway, so the one message you want to leave the audience with. Irina, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think these ongoing conversations needs to be maintained and proliferate and actually include more users' perspective, representation from indigenous community groups. So we're not really distancing away with what we're discussing here with the real reality on the ground, and it will be really helpful for us to also keep grounded in our narrative and our discussion. So maybe looking forward for the next round of discussion with more diverse participant. But thank you so much for the event today. I'm learning a lot.
Thanks a lot. This is indeed important feedback, which also relates to quite some key takeaways that were made yesterday during the panel discussion on the dimension of human rights. So thank you for this. Dinesh, would you like to share your takeaway?
I think we must continue this dialogue, which means more and more cooperations and collaborations with a better governance structure based on the real outcome of this exercise, which means action plan once put in place should be materialized, should be capitalized. That is one side of it. And then again, let's make best use of the available platform by exchanging more dialogue, is what I would say. And do not rely on one technology. When you talk about disaster, I would always say that roll out multiple technologies, because if one fails, you have the backup in place, which means resilience is a very, very important factor when you're addressing a subject like disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would really like to thank you for sharing really interesting perspectives and also concrete takeaways that will certainly be feed into the report that will be published shortly after. And I would now like to invite Fanny, because I think we move on to the next part of our discussion today. Thanks again, Dinesh. Thanks again, Irina and Mohammed, who left already. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Stefania, and thank you all for these two panel discussions addressing pressing matters to achieve truly resilient and human-centric digital connectivity. In order to summarize the panel takeaways, I would like to call the moderators actually back to the floor, starting with Sohyun Shin and followed by Stefania Benalia. Sohyun, what are your key takeaways from today's panel on cybersecurity cooperation? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Fanny and Stefania. it was long 2 days, right? I also participated in yesterday's full sessions, and then I found that these 2 days are related and they're very closely connected. So my takeaways, it's during the cyber resilience and cooperation sessions, our great speakers reminded of many relevant issues and made me bridge yesterday's and today's issues. And then there would be no one who denied the importance of resilience and the necessity of international cooperation in securing cyber resilience. Now, the critical question is how to work together for being resilient against the various types of cyber incidents, attacks, or conflicts, even armed conflicts. So 3 speakers defined cyber resilience well in their own term. And then I found that there is not that much difference in definition itself. I think the practical problem is to seek resilience within one country, and further to build a cooperative system for regional cyber resilience, and also more broadly to build international cooperation mechanism to secure inter-regional resilience. And then in this regard, I think the EU regime has taken continuously the position of showing the best practice and leading regulatory framework regarding legislations, guidelines, diplomatic efforts, institutions, and state practice, and so on. So as Lorenzo, our first speaker, presented, the EU has developed many legislative initiatives and spread its concepts and the regulatory frames over the world, such as GDPR and Budapest Convention. Actually, shamefully, South Korea is a very ICT developed country, but we are also not the member country of the Budapest Convention. Surprisingly, we've tried so many years, but not yet. So as an international lawyer myself, the EU's direction and approach always inspire me. But of course, the history and culture of Asia region are quite different from Europe, and also more complex in terms of a power balance. Rather, the situations of Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia are completely different. So Fitri's presentation about ASEAN countries inform us well Southeast Asian countries' internal issues and their power dynamics or their struggles or their cooperations. But, the situation that South Korea and Japan face seems to me comparatively harsher because we are just a neighboring country of North Korea, China, and Russia. And then those countries not likely-minded countries of us. So also Melanie paid great attention to the recent armed conflict case of Ukraine and focused on cooperation with the private sector for cyber resilience, particularly in geopolitical crisis. As she pointed out at the last part, in my view, we cannot project the future of public or state and private sector partnership, PPP, as future. And also cooperation in cyber resilience based on only one case of Ukraine. But also it's a very interesting case study though. Microsoft and Starlink are all American multinational tech companies, and also the United States are the ally of Ukraine. In addition, cyber resilience is not only required in situation of conflict or armed conflict, it's necessary for our daily lives and so on, that also escalated situation So further, in case of data flow, we've talked a lot about data flow yesterday in terms of human rights and connectivity things. And then data flow, which is also, there is a kind of two confrontations between the data localization and containment in a sovereign country versus a free flow of data or data emergency transition that is also provided by Microsoft in Ukraine recently. So these issues are still undergoing. So no one can project exactly, or, it's, in my view, it's too early to project, I think. So each state can take their own position on this issue. And then interestingly, remember it, Estonia, who were also massively cyber attacked by Russia, not in armed conflict, but, kind of nearly conflict. And then Estonia invented the so-called cyber embassy, national data center located in the Luxembourg. They made some kind of treaties, bilateral treaties. And then interestingly, Ukraine got help from the private tech company Microsoft to protect their national data. So, it's compare these two cases. I think it's a very interesting phenomenon. How international community or how individual states will go for data protection or national data center protection to defend themselves or to be resilient later, preparing for the future or upcoming conflicts. So for the time being, I think we cannot clearly answer those issues we mentioned today. But I think we all agreed the importance and necessity of connectivity and cyber resilience cooperation between Asia and Europe. So that's nice, right? And then I think it will bring a kind of for us to bring us the room for breath in the course of polarization of world politics and the power competition. So I think in this regard, I do hope the cooperation between Europe and Asia, like ASCOM, should be intensified more and more. Yeah, that's my takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is indeed quite a task to summarize the richness of these discussions because a lot has been said. For that, I actually like to use keywords that for me are particularly effective because they kind of tend to stick better to my mind, at least. Because we have seen that there was throughout the 2 days, actually, not only in this panel, but also in the one that Sojung just mentioned, there is a unanimity on the need for enhanced cooperation. Pretty much every panel, every speaker called for this. And the question is, how do we actually make it happen? Now, focusing on the panel that I moderated, there were 3 main issues that came up. The issue of the digital submarine cables that need to be really be seen more strategically, the issue of the user perspective, so bringing back the human-centric dimension, which is also the user-centric dimension higher up in the agenda. This is a similar call of what was made actually yesterday in another panel, and the issue of interoperability, which has been read in the terms of standards, and on the need of not relying on a single technology, because if that fails, then we have a trouble, especially in the context of conflict reaction, disaster reaction, and overall the need for interoperability to aim towards a more functioning system globally. So diving a little bit with these three issues in mind, a little bit on what has been presented in the conversation, we started with lessons from a real event, from a volcano-induced tsunami. And we have seen how actually what were the elements that played, and how especially the importance of the weeks and months and years after the disaster struck. And the fact that the danger, if the reaction is not timely and thorough, the danger after actually might even be more substantial. And the fact that as the last mile is actually left to the community, this is actually an approach that that may not be the best geared one. We have then moved on the whole issue of submarine cables, which are really the backbone of the entire communication between the two continents, and need to be protected on one side, and on the other side also seen more as a strategic tool, because currently they are mostly left to the private sector, and they're mostly seen as a private sector and engagement, which should not be the case, because they have a strategic importance which should be made, should be more aware for the public sector, which should put more in public investment and research and treat it as a public good. Because the connotation of these tools is actually from, you know, the energy transition that is coming up, to the growth of the digital economy, the connectivity, the research. So the dimension of the submarine cable is actually multifolded. So we need to actually bring this, treat this issue more as a strategic rather than a private sector issue. The last point, and definitely not in order of importance, is the issue of interoperability that kind of works as an overarching issue, because nothing, especially when we talk about standards, if they are developed locally or regionally, it doesn't work. They need to be globally developed and globally applied and globally supported. And this is indeed the whole contentious issue, because how to make that happen is the tricky part. But we need to leverage the technology to work together, and platforms such as the CDRI are an extremely helpful tool in this context. And here I actually conclude with a slightly personal note, because that's a little bit the opportunity that we have as well. Because we indeed, together with my colleague Fanny Sauvignon and Lisa Di Giacomo, and another think tank, RIS, an Indian think tank, and the colleague Arun Nair, we actually developed a paper based on interoperability in the context of the G20. And we indeed use the early warning system as a case study to show how interoperability is crucial, because geostrategically we're going towards a direction where there are several connectivity initiatives, and we need to make sure that we work towards enhanced cooperation and interoperability at all levels, from the political system to the strategic and the technologies that are applied, the standards, and all of this enter into this interoperable dynamic, because otherwise we get into a scenario where we are in an unhealthy competition, and that is to the detriment of actually achieving global goals, which is at the end of the day why we are here actually to discuss how do we move forward towards global goals. So I think that I now close here, and I would like to invite slightly ahead of time, but this is also this is good if he's ready. I would like to invite the head of connectivity and digital transition from the European External Action Service, Mr. David Ringrose, for the concluding remarks. David Ringrose, if you are available, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me okay,
great.
Stefania?
Perfect.
So great. Good to see you again. And thanks for that very interesting wrap up. It shows me a number of things. Firstly, that the discussion here was extremely useful because it brought together big political issues with very practical issues, showing that if we're going to try to solve these big issues that we're talking about in terms of connectivity, we have to take into account all of these various issues about the decision makers, how the decisions are made, who's involved in the discussions, and what we're actually trying to achieve. So that was a really interesting snapshot, I guess. Firstly, of course, I'd like to thank all of the partners and everybody who's behind the screen for the organization. What seems to have gone extremely well in technical terms, which is something we should never take for granted these days on these sort of complex processes. So thanks a hell of a lot to everybody who's made ASCON 3 a success. So to Stephanie and her colleagues at CEPS, the Center for European Policy Studies, to the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN in East Asia, to AREA in Jakarta, the Sejong Institute in Seoul, and the Asia-Europe Foundation in Singapore. So I think this was a really good collaboration between the EU and various parts of Southeast Asia and East Asia. So showing that when we're working together, we can have good results. So I think that really counts. I think the breadth of the discussion showed that digital connectivity among all of the areas that we're working on is developing the fastest. In my team, I'm working on digital, but also on Global Gateway as a whole for the EAS. And one of the things we're trying to do is to see how we can bring Global Gateway as much as possible in line with the developments in digital, because of course, working on energy, transport, and these type of issues, even on climate, there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of conferences that have been happening for decades. There's a lot of people working in all of our delegations. The lines with stakeholders are all very clear. And comparatively, I think on digital connectivity, we see that we still have a lot more cooperation to build up and so on in order to actually agree on concrete projects. And I think we heard a bunch of very good projects, and including in the Philippines, for example, and the discussions we've had in under the Swedish presidency on connectivity in the Indo-Pacific show that we've come a long way. But I think this conference was very useful in ensuring that we can continue that acceleration in bringing connectivity into the heart of our policy in the region. A lot of the horizontal issues you talked about the human-centric approach, about interoperability and so on, about the centrality of cables to all of this. These are issues that we're working on at the moment with a view to getting conclusions from the Foreign Affairs Council at the end of June. So the highest decision-making body on foreign policy in the European Union will be discussing digital diplomacy, as we call it. That includes all of the work we're doing on digital at the end of June. And they will come up with some conclusions that we're agreeing on now. And I think what's clear is that they will agree that digital connectivity is an increasingly important part of our foreign policy, that it's important for the European Union to support and to work with its partners on human-centric digital transformation, to make our offer as attractive as possible, because we're not the only people in this market, of course, and there's a lot of other players out there. And we need to, if we're going to support our values and the way we do things, we need to ensure that we can make an attractive offer for our partners around the world. So keep an eye on the digital diplomacy pages of the EAS website at the end of June, and you will see the council conclusions, and I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of the issues we've been talking about over the past few days. So that's more or less all I have to say. I'll end again with a big thanks to all of the colleagues, and it's very important that we continue these exchanges. So I hope to come back to you next year for a fourth session. Stefania, I don't know if you'll still be with us next year, hopefully so, but we can talk about all of that later. Thank you very much to everybody. I guess maybe what's needed now is some final housekeeping and wrap-up remarks about the conference, but thank you to everybody for all of this. It's been extremely interesting, and I look forward to reading the report. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I certainly hope to be here next week, and that's a good auspicious to close this conference indeed. Thank you for the kind words. Indeed, I simply want to thank again all the many people that made this event possible. So the support of with the support of the European Union in cooperation with the Asia Europe Foundation based in Singapore, CEPS, and all my colleagues within CEPS, Rosanna Fanni, Fanny Sauvignon, Lisa Di Giacomo, that they all contributed, you know, one another to this event, and all the team that was behind, also the IT team, the partners, the Sejong Institute in Seoul and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area in Jakarta. So thanks to all of you. I would also like to remind you that your valuable feedback is appreciated. So please take a few moments to fill in the survey that you find in the link in the chat. Last reminder that indeed the recordings of the conference will be available in the website, as well as the takeaways in the form of a report in the coming days in the ISCON website. Thanks again very much to all of you, to all the speakers for sharing their insights, and I look forward to continue the conversation. Thank you. Bye.